All right, the waivers. I said I was going to cover this only very briefly because as supplier, distributor, manufacturer, you cannot personally request a new waiver for a product. Only the grant or cooperative agreement, the financial assistance recipient can do that. The head of the federal agency has to do this, and so the waivers are not taken lightly. It's not any old federal employee can grant this. It actually has to go up to the level of the secretary, typically in the agency, to issue that waiver. And there are three bases in which that might happen. Non-availability. There simply are no domestic sources of the product. What's called public interest. There's some reason why buying that product domestically doesn't make sense from the public interest purpose. And then, one that sort of kind of fits with public interest in some sense because of, taxpayer dollars being spent, unreasonable cost. And so there is a list of waivers that have are currently applicable. There's the website there, the madeinamerica.gov office, which is also a relatively new entity that was kind of created during that whole time frame that I was talking about with the pandemic and domestic supply chain. They consolidated a lot of the domestic sourcing uh, uh, regulations and infrastructure in the government into a Made in America office. So, but there is a list on that website of current waivers if you're interested in seeing whether a particular product may be exempt because it's been waived. All right. um, Once you have a BABA product there's no waiver and it is incorporated in the project, then or in the project, excuse me, then there really are four categories that product can fit in, and it needs to be classified into kind of the best fit category at the time the product is brought to the work site. So there's four categories. So now we're assuming that we've got, and one of those categories is the exempt category, the 70917C, right? But there are three categories to which the domestic sourcing rules applies and one exempt category. So we've already determined here that the product is being incorporated into a BABA covered project. And now we just need to classify that product to figure out whether it's domestically sourced or not. So each of the four categories has its own definition of what it's included and what it means to be made in the USA. All right, so first is that 70917C. That means cement and cementitious. I don't that word has got me. That's not a word I've seen before. But
Cementitious.
there you go, cementitious. Thank you, Ian. I appreciate that because that's too much in the construction world for me. So I appreciate that. Aggregates such as stone, sand, gravel, binding agents, and additives, and you see, an example. So that's what Section 709(7)(c) materials means. Those are simply exempt from the domestic production requirement. I don't know the background of how that exemption came to be from a regulatory perspective, but once a product is classified as a 709(7)(c), then no domestic sourcing requirement applies. All right, iron or steel products. That is pretty easy to understand. Articles, materials, or supplies consist wholly or predominantly of iron or steel, or a combination of both. In the interest of time and not boring people too much, I'm not going to read some of these definitions that are coming up to you, except to say that the regulations do provide you guidance as to what does it mean to be predominantly iron or steel, or a combination of both. And you see that there's a cost calculation that you would do, a component cost calculation, if you're not sure whether the product is predominantly iron or steel, or a combination thereof. There's also a definition of component, right? Because both the iron and steel and the manufactured product test, which we'll see in a slide or two, require an analysis of the cost of components. And so the regulations also provide a definition of component that would be the same definition to be used for those two categories when you're trying to figure out whether the product is a manufactured product, whether it's iron or steel. Then you use this definition of component in those component tests. Now, if you back to iron and steel, what does it mean for an iron or steel product to be produced in the United States? It means that all manufacturing processes from the initial melting stage through the application of coatings occurred in the United States. And so that you've got the definition. Once you put the product in that category, say, yep, this is an iron or steel product, then you apply this definition here on this slide to determine whether that product qualifies as produced in the USA for purposes of BABA.